श्री स्वामीनारायण भगवाननी जय, अक्षर पुरुषोत्तम महाराजनी जय, प्रमुख स्वामी महाराजनी जय, महंत स्वामी महाराजनी जय, प्रमुख स्वामी महाराज शताब्दी महोत्सवनी जय. Today as we carry on with the study of the Jivan Charitra, we will start off with I-26. The festival of Janmashtami, the year is 1967. And the festival of Janmashtami was coming up. And so Yogiji Maharaj stayed back in Mumbai while Pramukh Swami Maharaj left for Atladra. Swami Shri would often celebrate the Janmashtami celebrations in Atladra. In fact, throughout his life, we've known that every time when Swami was able, most of the time Janmashtami would be celebrated in Atladra. But while Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Atladra, one day while Yogiji Maharaj was, Yogiji Maharaj used to do his Mangal Pravachan, the first Katha in the morning. And during his Mangal Pravachan, he said something very interesting. And Yogi Bapa carried on saying, Tran Motera, Kothari Swami, Mahant Swami, and Dr. Swami. Basically he says Kothari, Puja Bhakti Priya Swami, Mahant Swami, Swayam Prakash Swami, Dr. Swami, અને સૌના મોટેરા પ્રમુખ સ્વામી તે કહે તેમ કરવું. Yogiji Maharaj was establishing, again talking about Pramukh Swami Maharaj and establishing Pramukh Swami Maharaj, but something very interesting that Yogiji Maharaj said in his Mangal Pravachan. Let's move on to I-27. Now, one afternoon during Swami Shri's stay in Atladra, two leading Hari Bhaktas, Mathur Bhai and Purushottam Bhai, had actually come in. And as it was lunchtime, Pramukh Swami Maharaj sat them down in the dining hall and proceeded to the kitchen to collect some hot malpura. Pramukh Swami Maharaj, again, we can see that when the Hari Bhaktas would come, Pramukh Swami Maharaj was always in seva. He would be there to serve them and help them out. And so these two Hari Bhaktas were there. And so Pramukh Swami Maharaj was just looking after their lunch and helping them out and serving them lunch. And so Pramukh Swami Maharaj then walked into the kitchen to collect some hot malpura. But as soon as he went into the kitchen and he picked up a few malpuras, he was very surprisingly stopped by the cook. And the cook, was very a little aggressive and a little rude in the way he said it. Now to think about it, that Pramukh Swami Maharaj was the president of the Sanstha. But the way he worked behind the curtains was just so evident over here, that the cook even failed to recognize that Pramukh Swami Maharaj, who Pramukh Swami Maharaj was. He actually mistook Swami Shri for some other sadhu, and so he actually scolded Pramukh Swami Maharaj, just telling him, these malpuras are for the sadhus, don't take them for the Hari Bhaktos. And the cook was very rude, and he snatched the plate away from Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Swami Shri didn't even react. He didn't even explain himself, nor did he flex his authority. Again, very typical. He didn't flex his authority. Instead, he very silently just tolerated. Puja Mahant Swami Maharaj writes in the Jiva Mein Nirkhyare that Pramukh Swami Maharaj power no powder kari nakhelo. So he never used his power or his authority. And we can see this, that had he wanted to, he could have actually put those people into their place. But again, Swami just very humbly and very quietly just tolerated and walked away. But these two Hari Bhaktas, Mathur Bhai and Purushottam Bhai, they saw what actually happened, and so they were very quick to react. And immediately, they came up and they actually told the cook off, and he said, hey, do you know who this really is? This is the chief of the Sanstha. This is the president of the Sanstha. You can't say such things. As soon as the cook found out, he was actually shaken with fear. That he was now at the risk of losing his job. And immediately he fell at Swami Shri's feet and he began apologizing. But Pramukh Swami Maharaj very lovingly patted his back. He raised him back up and blessed him and saying, look, nothing's happened. He didn't realize anything. It wasn't his fault. And then he, quietly picked up the plate of warm malpura and carried on serving lunch to the Hari Bhaktos as if nothing had even happened. Again, another testimony of Pramukh Swami Maharaj's humility, how flexible he was, how approachable he was. And as we mentioned earlier, how behind the curtains he would work that people wouldn't even notice that he was the Pramukh of the Sanstha. Puja Mahant Swami Maharaj had often said that Pramukh Swami Maharaj પડદાની પાછળ રહીને બધું કાર્ય કરતા હતા તો કોઈને ખબર પણ ન પડે. So very silently he would do all this. Let's move on to I-28. So from Atladra, Pramukh Swami Maharaj gradually made his way to Limbdi. The purpose of going to Limbdi was for the Pratishtha, or the new mandir that had been built over there for the Mahila Hari Bhaktas. And Yogiji Maharaj was already there to perform the Pratishtha. Once the Pratishtha Vidhi was done, then Pramukh Swami Maharaj traveled to Morbi. Now we will see that over the next couple of months, how tireless Pramukh Swami Maharaj's Vicharan was. But along the Vicharan, while he was doing Vicharan, everywhere he would have to do Padramnis, and still he would have to do the Parayans. While Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Morbi, he did a Parayan on the Harilila Kalpataru. And on one of these occasions, one of the days, Yogiji Maharaj was seated in the Sabha. He was offering Vartman to all the Hari Bhaktas at that time. And unknowingly, a Mahila Hari Bhakta came very close to Thakurji's asan, to the seat where Thakurji was. Yogiji Maharaj, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, Sant Swami, and the other sadhus were also seated on the same asan. Despite there was no direct contact, they all decided to observe a fast according to Bhagavan Swaminarayan's niyams. And so Swami Shri then requested, even Yogiji Maharaj decided to do an upas at that time. And then Pramukh Swami Maharaj very politely and very humbly requested Yogi Bapa. He says, Swami, look, we'll do the upas on your behalf. There's no need for you to fast. And eventually, as a result of Pramukh Swami Maharaj's request, Yogiji Maharaj took a little, very unwillingly, he took something to eat. But then he told the other sadhus and the youths to fast on his behalf. Pramukh Swami Maharaj then took the shower, the ceremonial shower as needed, and continued with his Nirjala fast on that day. So this was another prasang that was very noteworthy in this chapter. Let's move on to I-29. Now during this Parayan in Morbi, Pramukh Swami Maharaj's sevak, he fell ill at that time. And so then a youth named Shanti Bhai Pataria, he was traveling with Yogiji Maharaj. And so normally what the sevak would do, the yuvak decided to do that. And so he took over the seva and he washed Pramukh Swami Maharaj's clothes and he rinsed them. And then he was hanging them out for dry. But before that, he went to Yogiji Maharaj, when Yogi Bapa was doing puja. So he went to Yogi Bapa's puja and he did Yogi Bapa's darshan. While Yogi Bapa was doing his puja, he saw the yuvak walk in late. And so he gestured to him that, why are you late? The yuvak didn't say anything. But after Yogi Bapa's puja, Shanti Bhai came to Yogiji Maharaj and he explained that, Bapa, I was washing Pramukh Swami Maharaj's clothes at that time. And that's why I was late. And so Yogi Bapa said, Yogi Bapa આવું બોલ્યા કે ઓહો તમારા કેટલા મોટા ભાગ્ય પ્રમુખ સ્વામીની સેવા મળી સંસ્થાના ધણી કહેવાય સ્વામી એટલે શાસ્ત્રીજી મહારાજ છે નિમેલા છે તમારા હાથ પ્રસાદી ના થયા loving words તમારા હાથ પ્રસાદી ના થયા લાવો માથે હાથ મૂકે યોગીજી મહારાજ પણ બહુ મહિમાની મૂર્તિ હતા. The fact that this yuvak had washed Pramukh Swami Maharaj's clothes, Yogiji Maharaj wanted to take the blessings from the yuvak who had actually washed. Why? Because he was fortunate enough to wash Pramukh Swami Maharaj's clothes. And this was the Mahima Drashti that Yogiji Maharaj had. And then this is what Yogi Bapa said. Then Yogi Bapa goes, and that's why Yogi Bapa was very, very pleased with what the yuvak had done. He was કરીને લાવો માથે હાથ મૂકીએ. So although and then with these words, Yogiji Maharaj then tried to place the hands of the youth on his head. But although the youth immediately retracted his hands, Yogiji Maharaj's words and action made everyone understand the greatness or the identity of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Let's move on to I-30. Now while Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Morbi, Yogiji Maharaj and Pramukh Swami Maharaj then also went to the palace of the Maharaja of Morbi and they blessed the palace at that time. And then from there, they made their way to Gondal. While in Gondal, the municipality of Gondal had organized a public ceremony to honor Yogiji Maharaj and Pramukh Swami Maharaj. This was on the 29th of October, 1967. Now this was the first instance wherein a certificate of honor was being conferred to any religious figure at that time. And the certificate of honor was, on that certificate, it was imprinted on a silk cloth. And this is what it read. On behalf of Gondal municipality, we are happy to pay homage to you, Brahmaswarup Sri Yogiji Maharaj, and to Pramukh Swami. The lives of great individuals like you are meant for the whole world. However, the love that you have for Gondal is your ultimate grace upon Gondal. They have also included Pramukh Swami Maharaj's name. Now remember that Yogiji Maharaj was the guru of the Sanstha at that time. But taking into consideration Pramukh Swami Maharaj being the president, they made sure that they also had Pramukh Swami Maharaj's name on that. And on this occasion, in his own diary, Pramukh Swami Maharaj writes that today, Gondal municipality honored Pujya Swamiji, meaning Pujya Yogiji Maharaj. Interestingly enough, in this entry, he didn't even mention a single word about the honor or of his name or anything like that. It was all about Yogiji Maharaj. It was, if you compare that to somebody posting something on a Facebook or on a profile status or something like that, it would be natural to put your own name in it. Nevertheless, Pramukh Swami Maharaj ignored that, and he made sure it was only Yogiji Maharaj that was mentioned in his own diary. Let's move on to I-31. Now, the opening ceremony of the grand entrance gate of the mandir in Gondal was to be opened on that day on the day of Dhanteras. And so this was why Pramukh Swami Maharaj was also in Gondal at that time. And after this, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then left for Sarangpur. The reason for going to Sarangpur was to celebrate the festivities of Diwali and Ankut and the New Year. Now, on the day of Diwali, Yogiji Maharaj wrote a few words of Swami Shri's Mahima. And this is what Yogiji Maharaj wrote. Yogiji Maharaj was in Gondal and Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Sarangpur at this time. And Yogiji Maharaj goes on to write, Pramukh Swami dhode lugde, Pramukh Swami dhode lugde hata, ત્યારે સ્વામી શ્રીએ મૂળ અક્ષર મૂર્તિ ગુણાતીતાન સ્વામીના સ્થાન અક્ષર દેરીમાં દીક્ષા આપીને રૂઢા આશીર્વાદ આપ્યા છે. તેથી તેમને સ્વામીના પ્રતાપે બળ આવ્યું છે. સ્વામીના આશીર્વાદ પામીને આ સંસ્થાનું કાર્ય કરી રહ્યા છે. Swami is writing about Pramukh Swami Maharaj's Mahima. વળી સ્વામીએ અમદાવાદમાં સંસ્થાના meaning શાસ્ત્રીજી મહારાજે અમદાવાદમાં સંસ્થાના માનત meaning મહંત એટલે પ્રમુખ બનાવ્યા. ત્યારે તે નાના હતા, પણ સ્વામીએ દ્રષ્ટિ કરી, મારે એમને જ સંસ્થાના પ્રમુખ કરવા છે. તે અમદાવાદમાં કર્યા. તે પછી હું પાસે બેઠો હતો તો સ્વામી મને કહે, તમો તેમના ઉપર હાથ મૂકો તો તમારા જેવા ગુણ આવે. ત્યારે મેં કહ્યું, આપે હાથ મૂક્યો તે આવી ગયો. ત્યારે સ્વામી કહે, તોય તમે હાથ મૂકો. Very innocent the way Yogi Bapa says all this. એમ સ્વામીએ કહ્યું એટલે મેં હાથ મૂક્યો. સ્વામી બહુ રાજી થયા. Very interesting how Yogiji Maharaj is in Gondal and reminiscing and remembering about his guru Shastriji Maharaj, and how Shastriji Maharaj had blessed Pramukh Swami Maharaj in Amliwali Pod in Ahmedabad, how Shastriji Maharaj had given Diksha, how Shastriji Maharaj had blessed Pramukh Swami Maharaj and then asked Yogiji Maharaj to shower his blessings on Pramukh Swami Maharaj. કે તમો પણ તેમના ઉપર હાથ મૂકો તો તમારા જેવા ગુણ આવે. Very innocently Yogiji Maharaj is writing this. તોય તમે હાથ મૂકો. એમ સ્વામીએ કહ્યું એટલે મેં હાથ મૂક્યો. સ્વામી બહુ રાજી થયા, ખૂબ રાજી થયા. આવી રીતે સ્વામીએ ગોંડલમાં દીક્ષા દેરીમાં આપી ને અમદાવાદમાં પ્રમુખ બનાવ્યા. Remembering two prasangs over here, how Pramukh Swami Maharaj was given Diksha by his Guru Shastriji Maharaj in Gondal. At that time, Shastriji Maharaj had asked Yogiji Maharaj to bless Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And even when Pramukh Swami Maharaj was made the Pramukh or the president of the Sanstha, this was in Amliwali Pod. Even at that time, Shastriji Maharaj had asked Yogiji Maharaj to shower his blessings on Pramukh Swami Maharaj. So this is another incident that Pramukh Swami Maharaj, Yogiji Maharaj recounted. ભવિષ્યમાં તે સ્વામીના પ્રતાપે અલૌકિક કાર્ય કરશે. Yogiji Maharaj is prophesying that even in the future, Pramukh Swami Maharaj is going to perform some great deeds. Bo motu karya Pramukh Swami Maharaj karse. Now it's noteworthy that Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Sarangpur during the celebrations at this time. While Yogi Bappa is thinking about Pramukh Swami Maharaj, we can see that throughout Yogiji Maharaj's time, when Pramukh Swami Maharaj was the president, on so many different occasions, Yogiji Maharaj had always talked about the greatness of Pramukh Swami Maharaj, and he wanted to reveal to everybody very innately, very silently, very subtly, that Pramukh Swami Maharaj was the heir in the future. Let's move on to I-32. So Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Saharanpur to celebrate the Diwali celebrations. There was a break in the middle before the New Year celebrations. But on the New Year's Day, Pramukh Swami Maharaj wrote in his diary that on New Year's Day, darshan at Deri, meaning that we went to darshan at Deri, Deri meaning Shastriji Maharaj's memorial shrine. Now this is what he writes. On New Year's Day, darshan at Deri, as well as Pujya Sant Swami, Sanatan Swami, Dharam Swami, Pujari Dharmadas, and Pujya Hari Prakash, and Pujya Ghanshyam Swami, and Pujya Narayan Swami, and Dev Charan Swami. It's very interesting how Pramukh Swami Maharaj writes this. Not only did he specially go to do darshan and say Jai Swaminarayan, not only did he go specially to do darshan at the Deri, but he also went to do seek blessings and say Jai Swaminarayan to all the other sadhus who were much more, some of them who were elder to him, but some of them who were also much younger to him. I mean, Hari Prakash, Ghanshyam Swami, Narayan Swami, Devcharan Swami, they were all much younger than Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Yet, even on New Year's Day, Pramukh Swami Maharaj reaches out to them to seek their blessings as well. Again, testimony of his humility and the mahima that he had of all the santos who were with him at that time. After the Ankut celebrations, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then came to Ahmedabad to celebrate the festival of Prabodhini Ekadashi. Prabodhini Ekadashi, we all know, is the end of Chaturmas. We have now just moved into the Chaturmas, but Prabodhini Ekadashi is the end of Chaturmas. And from here, Swami then went on to Vartal and then visited Bhabha Ram Mandir, which is just 2 miles away from Vaso. From there, Swami Shri then made his way to Bochasan on the occasion of Kartik Punam. Now, during that time, while Swami was in Bochasan, Swami, again, this is very typical of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. He would be in a larger center, but all the centers that were around him, all the villages and the little towns that were near the big center, Pramukh Swami Maharaj would make sure that he would do his vicharan in those areas. Now, to think that Swami made a visit to almost 22 villages. Swami went to Petlad, Padaj, Sojitra, Piplao, Medao, Vartal, Kheda, Matar, Tarapur, Dungri Timba, Mahijda, Naj, Vasai, Dharoda, Chitrasar, Shrijipura, Navagam, Naika, Bhaktipura, Sakej, and Nenpur. We'll put Nenpur in there as well because Swami went to all these villages and then came back to Bochasan. You know, Swami's vicharan was very tireless. Vicharan, Padramani, we could see this ongoing all the time. Now, during this entire vicharan, because Yogiji Maharaj wasn't too well, Pramukh Swami Maharaj was doing all the Padramanis in all these villages that he visited. So, the vicharan still carries on. Let's move on to I-33. Now, on one occasion, Yogiji Maharaj had come to the village of Demol during his vicharan. Pramukh Swami Maharaj was also with Yogiji Maharaj at that time. Unfortunately, Swami Shri came down with a fever and a throbbing headache at that time. It was also pretty cold at that time. Now, when the local devotees urged Yogiji Maharaj to come for Padramanis, this was in Demol, Yogiji Maharaj replied and said, look, Pramukh Swami Maharaj will come for all the Padramanis on my behalf. So already the responsibilities have now been given to Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Now, in an attempt to get Yogiji Maharaj to stay in Demol, the volunteers then said, well, Swami, that we also have a sabha that has been arranged in the school, and you know, we would like you to also come to the sabha. But then Yogiji Maharaj then instantly replied that, look, Pramukh Swami Maharaj will come to the sabha as well. He will do the Padramanis, he'll come to the sabha. Pramukh Swami is a great sadhu. He's the chief of the sanstha. And so then, saying these words, Yogiji Maharaj then left for another village called Ramol. Now, despite the fever that Swami had, he was very shivering, he had a fever. Pramukh Swami Maharaj took on his Guru's Agna and began the Padramanis in Demol. He started off with one Padramani, 2, 5, 15, 25. It went up to all the way to 45 Padramnis. Swami had a very serious fever at that time. And if that were not enough, as soon as he got to the school for a sabha, again, the Padramnis had already drained him. He played it down completely, and he carried on. He properly addressed the sabha in the school, and then eventually left for Ramol. Again, he was following and making sure he was keeping up with Yogiji Maharaj. Now, as soon as they got to Ramol, they saw that Yogiji Maharaj was conducting the katha over there. And from a distance, Yogiji Maharaj saw Pramukh Swami Maharaj coming in. And obviously not knowing that Pramukh Swami Maharaj was not too well, as soon as Yogiji Maharaj saw Pramukh Swami Maharaj, he announced and he says, "Amara Pramukh avi gaya che. Pramukh Swami avi gaya che. Now that our Pramukh Swami is here, he will speak. Amara Pramukh Swami Maharaj avi gaya che. Have e kathavartano labh aapse." Immediately, the mic was given to Pramukh Swami Maharaj. We can see how flexible Pramukh Swami Maharaj was and how accommodating he was. Obviously, because it was Yogiji Maharaj's wish, we could see Pramukh Swami Maharaj's Guru Bhakti in this. As soon as the mic was given, Pramukh Swami Maharaj began his katha. He was visibly very shattered. He was struggling to speak. Hakabapu sensed the situation, and immediately he stood up midway through the discourse, through the pravachan, and he took the mic and he announced the conclusion of the sabha. He says, "Sabha puri karna kya." Swamiji was immediately rushed to his accommodation and strictly advised to rest. Medications were also given to Pramukh Swami Maharaj right away. But we can see that without uttering a word, Pramukh Swami Maharaj carried on according to Yogiji Maharaj's wish. So another very interesting prasang over here. Let's move on to I-34. Now during the Vicharan, the Anand Satsang Mandal had organized a Parayan in Bochasan in memory of Bhakti Vallabh Swami, who had actually passed away recently. So Swami Shri then delivered a katha in the Parayan over there at that time. From there, Swami then made his way to Ahmedabad, where two Haribhaktas and Devprasad Swami, who had fallen ill. So they were being treated in different hospitals. So Pramukh Swami Maharaj went to visit all three of them in the hospitals, again just to comfort them and to check up on them. This is again very typical of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Any sadhus or Haribhaktas he knew who were not too well, Swami would make sure that he would visit the hospital, he would ask about their food, their medication, shower a lot of sympathy and empathy towards them. And this gentle healing touch that Swami would have would soothe even the patients that were there. In fact, just a glimpse of Pramukh Swami Maharaj coming to visit them would actually bring a lot of energy to those who were ill. And he would also make sure that the doctors, that were well recommended. Again, Swami would offer his prayers. He would do dhun in front of the patients, give them a lot of comfort accordingly. And Maharaj has said, we say often in the Cheshta, Ati Dayadu Swabhav Che. Swami, we can see the compassion in Swami Shri through these acts. Eventually, gradually, Swami Shri then made his way to Bochasan via Atladra. So this was I-34. Let's move on to I-35. Now the year has ended, 1967 has ended, and we're moving into 1968. Now after spending about 9 days in Bochasan, Pramukh Swami Maharaj eventually traveled to Vadodara. There he attended a conference which was organized by the Divine Life Society, which was under the leadership of Swami Chidanand Saraswati from Rishikesh. Swami was there and he was asked to deliver the inaugural speech. We can see that even amidst all this traveling and everything, Pramukh Swami Maharaj was still at that time very much recognized by all the other sadhu sannyasis across India. Swami Chidanand Saraswati was a great revered sadhu who even today his ashram is there in Rishikesh. But again, we can see that how revered he was, and Swami was welcome there to deliver the inaugural address at that time. Now on the 6th of January 1968, that also saw the passing away of Motibhai Prabhudas Patel. Motibhai Prabhudas was Pramukh Swami Maharaj's Purvashram father, and a eulogy was written in the Swaminarayan Prakash commemorating him at that time. Now it read about Moti Kaka's Mahima and shared a very nice incident where Moti Kaka had brought home some, it talked about the greatness of Motibhai Prabhudas Patel, but there were also different incidences that were shared in the eulogy that was written. There was one incident that talked about how Moti Kaka had once come to Atladra and, they had made some sukhdi at home in order to offer to Thakurji and bring it to the Santos as well. And so while he was there trying to arrange his accommodation, there were some youths who had traveled with him, just guiding him and showing him to his accommodation. But while Moti Kaka was away for a while, one of the youths actually opened up the bag to take a look at what was in there, and he saw the sweets. And so, he took all the sweets, shared it with his friends, and they finished it off. Moti Kaka came back. When he opened his bag, he found out that the sukri was missing, because he wanted to take the sukri to offer it to Thakurji, give it to the pujari, who could then offer it to Thakurji. And he noticed that it was missing. So he didn't say much initially, but eventually when he got to meet one of the youths who was there with him, he told them very comfortingly, he said, look, as far as he was concerned, he said, look, I believe that when the youths ate the sukri, to me it was as if the sadhus who had eaten it. He wasn't cross, he wasn't upset at all. And because of all these youths, and he says that, look, I see all of you just like sadhus, because you've come in contact with Yogiji Maharaj. You will become very good satsangis. You may even become sadhus in the future. But then Moti Bhai says to the yuwak, he says, look, can you not inform the youth who actually took all the sweets? Don't tell him anything. And I don't want you to reprimand him in any way or anything like that. But again, you could see that we're very, very forgiving. And we can see these virtues in Pramukh Swami Maharaj as well. Very, very forgiving, wouldn't even look at the flaws of other people. On the contrary, lots of mahima, very, very encouraging. So we can see similar virtues in his father, in Pramukh Swami Maharaj's father. The eulogy also mentioned how Moti Kaka had faced many worldly problems throughout his life, but he always accepted them with a smile on his face. Bhagwan ni ichha thi badhu thai che. It's all by the will of God. And so, although he faced difficulties in his life, he was able to accept them with a smile on his face. Then there was another incident that was mentioned in the eulogy, that how Moti Kaka was once in Bochasan, and the Hari Bhaktas had been, they were seated there for breakfast along with Yogiji Maharaj. And then, because it was very crowded, a young volunteer then approached a Hari Bhakt who was actually sitting there, and he asked him to get up and move elsewhere to make room for another guest who had come at that time. The Hari Bhakt, he got up, but he was a little embarrassed, not too happy with what had actually happened. And Moti Kaka noticed this immediately. And so as soon as he noticed this, he immediately got up from his place. He told that Hari Bhakta, look, why don't you just sit down? And he told the youth that, let him sit in my place. And he made room for this Hari Bhakta. And then he also explained to that volunteer the greatness of this Hari Bhakta, that how this Hari Bhakta had followed Shastriji Maharaj's Agna. He had also looked after Shastriji Maharaj, done so much seva. And it was just such a nice person, because, again, very similar traits in Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Throughout his life, Swami had always made way for other people and made these sacrifices in his life. So it's very interesting to see the parallels between the life of Moti Bhai Prabhudas Patel, Pramukh Swami Maharaj's father, and in Pramukh Swami Maharaj's life. Eventually, the eulogy then ended with a mention of how Moti Bhai had actually allowed his son Pramukh Swami Maharaj to become a sadhu, and how this son had now become the leader of BAPS and earned the presence of the Rajipo of his gurus Shastriji Maharaj and Pramukh Swami Maharaj. So this was I-35. Let's move on to I-36. Now, during the month of January 1968, Pramukh Swami Maharaj spent a few weeks in Mumbai. He delivered a Parayan on the Hari Lila Kalpataru at the Kapodwadi. And on the final day of the Parayan, Yogiji Maharaj paid respects and tributes to Moti Kaka as well at that time. Yogiji Maharaj also did a special dhoon in memory of Moti Kaka. Now, during his stay in Mumbai, Swami Shri, along with Mahan Sai Maharaj, Puja Kothari Swami, they visited the Birla Mandir as well as Muktanand Baba's ashram, which is located in Vajreshwari. Swami Shri and the sadhus then performed, while they were in Mumbai, Pramukh Swami Maharaj and the sadhus who were there also performed lots of padramnis throughout Mumbai. And then on the 25th of January, Pramukh Swami Maharaj boarded the Saurashtra Express train with Yogiji Maharaj to travel to Bilimora. Now, taking into consideration Yogiji Maharaj's age and his fragile health, a lot of padramnis were carried out mostly by Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And wherever he went, Swami Shri would have to attend, along with his administrative duties, he would also have to do the Kathavarta, the Parayans, and the Padramnis. Swami Shri also took Puja Mahan Sai Maharaj and the other santos to the village of Haria. And over 300 Brahmins from that village had actually attended the satsang at that time. They did about 15 to 20 Padramnis in that village, and then eventually they made their way to Surat. Everyone's accommodation in Surat had been arranged in the Darya Mahal on the banks of the river Tapi. And on one morning, Yogiji Maharaj said that today I had a dream. Shriji Maharaj said, organize a parayan. Kaya parayan karvi che. So start a parayan from today. So Yogiji Maharaj hinted to everybody that aaj parayan apne karwani che. And as per Yogiji Maharaj's wish, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, an unplanned parayan, Pramukh Swami Maharaj began a parayan on the 7th chapter of the Harilila Kalpataru in Surat. Now seeing Swamiji seated on the Vyaspit, again reminded all the Hari Bhaktas of how Pramukh Swami Maharaj had performed a similar parayan in the time of Shastriji Maharaj. So that was another very nice deja vu moment for all the Hari Bhaktas in Surat. Let's move on to I-37. It was a Somvati Amavas that day. And so Swami Shri, along with the Santos and the Hari Bhaktas, they bathed in the river Tapi. Many years ago, Swami Shri had similarly bathed in the river Tapi with Shastriji Maharaj. And this brought back lots of fond memories of Shastriji Maharaj. And Swami Shri writes in his diary, in his daily journal, bathed in the Tapi. Bathed in the Tapi in the evening. At the same sanctified spot where Shastriji Maharaj and sadhus had bathed on the occasion of Amavasya. Pramukh Swami Maharaj had an incredible way of triggering so many memories of Shastriji Maharaj. These are all triggers. Nadi joine pan Shastriji Maharaj ni smruti thai avi. On one morning, Yogiji Maharaj's Mangal Pravachan in Surat, Yogiji Maharaj said, and this is again in this chapter again, ke marvanu darek ne che. જીવવાનું શું ભગવાન ને સંતમાં દિવ્ય ભાવ. શાસ્ત્રીજી મહારાજ પ્રમુખ સ્વામી મહારાજ જેવા પુરુષ મળ્યા તે કલ્યાણ થઈ ચૂક્યું. અધૂરું ન માનવું. આશરો છે તે ધામમાં જશું. Some very powerful, very strong words from Yogiji Maharaj that everyone has to die one day. What does it mean to live a life? Having divya bhav in God and the Sant, but by coming into the company of great luminaries like Shastriji Maharaj and Pramukh Swami Maharaj, one's liberation is confirmed. Never feel incomplete. You have attained God's refuge, so you will go to Dham. These were the words of Yogiji Maharaj. We will end today's session over here. Shri Swaminarayan Bhagwanani Jai.